Hello and welcome to Unleashed, the show that explores how to thrive as an independent professional. Unleashed is produced by Umbrex, which connects you with the world's top independent management consultants. And I'm your host, Will Bachman. I'm so excited to be here today with our guest, Keith Stoeckeler, who is the VP and Group Director at MKTG, a leading agency. Keith, welcome to the show.
Will, thanks for having me. Good morning.
So, Keith, I was hoping that today we could talk about two things. One is I know that you are a deep expert and do a lot of work with your clients around sports sponsorship and sponsorship of other, kind of major entertainment, music events, motorsports events. So that we could talk about that, and then also, just sort of pre-COVID, how that world works, and then also what you see as the effects of COVID and how that whole space will look moving forward.
Yeah, for sure. Would love to dig into that a little bit.
Okay, so let's talk about just sort of pre-COVID situation. Help explain to me, and I don't know really much about this world at all, how sports sponsorships work. How do brands decide that they want to sponsor a sport, decide which sport they want to get into, decide like which team they want to support, or the whole league, and like what are the different options when you're getting into it, of having your brand associated with a sport. Just kind of give me an overview.
Yeah, sure. And it varies based on the brand. Naturally, you want to be mindful of who your consumer is, who are you targeting, what's the customer that you might have. And so it ranges from, certain levels of sponsorships. I'm at an agency that have done, naming rights and league deals and, everything within the confines of sports sponsorship and marketing. But it really does matter who you're going after. Now, we work with IBM and have for a number of years, and we've worked on the transition of that brand from, heavy in golf and tennis to some other sports. We got them affiliated with ESPN and fantasy football, and we're building out some fantasy football programs. We work with Aston Martin, Red Bull Racing, and Formula One. So we're starting to skew that portfolio in a different way. But years ago, it was certainly heavily rooted and focused in golf and tennis. And I think as we brought in the audience and we thought about focusing on developers and different decision makers, it made sense to get out of some of these sports in the major ways that they were in years ago.
So when we say even just a brand is going to do a sponsorship, like what's the palette or menu of different options that they can think about? So if I'm like totally naive to this world, like what's the range from high to low? So you mentioned like naming rights of the stadium all the way down to giving out, having your logo on a T-shirt. What are the kind of the whole range of choices?
Yeah, for sure. And I think certain sponsorship levels, and that's what we're really good at this agency, is understanding what's the deal. We can value the deal for you. We can help you negotiate it. We can let you know what other, pieces you might want to ask for. So it varies with us on clients. But for a brand, to your point, yes, it can be anywhere as high as naming rights on stadiums or events and all the way down to logos or signage. But each deal gives you certain levels of access. So if you take motorsports, for instance, and I was recently at the Daytona 500 before everything changed in that sport, as with all sports. But there are branded entrances to the stadiums called injectors. There's footprints before you get into the track where brands have experiences, and there's whether they're giving things away or they're sampling product or they're educating you or there's some type of entertainment. So it's very much like a music festival or any branded experience you might be going to, but it's focused in sports. And so there's varying levels of, sponsorship opportunities, just like any conference or, you take like a CES, same kind of thing. If you think about how brands engage there, it's the same kind of thing focused in sports.
And how do they decide what sport to sponsor? So is there kind of detailed databases that a firm like yours would have on the demographics of each sport and like who the different fans are and stuff, so that if you're like IBM or some, a big company, and you're trying to figure out who are our users or who are our potential decision makers and how do we go after them, that you can find the most cost effective sport to go after?
Yes, there's a lot of research. We as a company have a separately a separate company that's under our umbrella that acts as a research and analytics firm, and they help value. They also help understand audiences. They do surveys. So there is a lot of data around that, and it's also we have to get smart on every sport. And I think as you talk about e-gaming, there's a lot of argument on whether that's a sport or not. We think that it is, and so we have a lot of data around it, just like any other sport. But there's tons of emerging sports. There's like the World Surf League, so there's all kinds of things that we perceive as a sports entity that we have to keep our thumb on and keep track of. But yes, you would come to us. We would help from a consultation perspective understand what might be some options based on your objectives and goals. And that's all rooted in research and our experience as as an agency.
All right. Like, what are some uh, sports where the demographics might be a little surprising to to me, or to just sort of the average person who's not paying close attention, where maybe the fans are far more wealthy or educated or more decision makers than you might have guessed from the outside?
Yeah, I think we could make an argument for really any sport, but working in Formula One the last couple of years, these are people that travel to a number of races. There are people that travel to almost all of the races, and there's even people that just try to make one in a different location. And since they're all most of them are outside the U.S. There's a race in Mexico and there's a race in Austin, Texas, but outside of that, it's a global sport. So what I found pretty interesting is the U.S. based fans who will wake up at odd hours of the day to watch the race live, because it's in Abu Dhabi, or it's in Europe. So it's been pretty interesting to follow that. But even in the U.S., the NFL, Major League Baseball, I mean, people would be surprised how young that's skewing, how female that's skewing. So I think the NBA has done a great job on social and engaging younger fans, and that's paid dividends. So really, we could make the case about any sport. I feel like a lot of people would be a bit surprised about the makeup of the fans of any sport, really.
One thing I've always wondered about is when a brand gets involved and like one on sort of sponsoring one sports team, like maybe naming their stadium, or kind of heavily promoting one sports team. How do they decide to do that? And doesn't that kind of maybe annoy their customers who are fans of other teams? How do they think about that?
Yeah, it's difficult. And honestly, as somebody who's more focused in the digital and social space, I'll leave that to a colleague of mine to probably answer better than me. But yeah, no doubt, it's difficult, and especially when we think about the long term deals. You got to think about, is this a brand from both sides? Like from the sports team, is this a brand that you want to associate the stadium and everything with? I mean, you think about some stadiums that have a branded, like Staples Center, that have a branded name, versus those like Madison Square Garden that does not. So it just depends. I think there's a lot of ability to hopefully or potentially make up money elsewhere. But a lot of times naming rights is such a lucrative deal, and a long-term deal. And for many brands, it's a great fit, given the awareness, given where sports broadcasters broadcast from the games, and it's in the background and people's, social posts. So there's a lot of value to that as well, beyond the traditional media value that we keep tabs on, specifically in social, as people take selfies and at the games and may not realize the signage that's behind them, or they didn't take the photo with that in mind. It was just me and my friend or whoever at a baseball game. But look at all the signage that's in the back, and how do we value that? So that's one of the things we do as well.
Hmm. Okay. Um, and so one thing that I wanted to ask about is how much of a part of these deals typically is if you're sponsoring a team or sponsoring in a league, um, is part of it, being able to go and bring sort of VIP guests to those events. And is that really like a big part of these deals typically, where if you're sponsoring an NBA game, that you get some special seats and get some, you get to bring your key clients to attend the games with you?
Sure, yeah, that is a big component of it. Part of our agency as well is hospitality and events. So yeah, I think it depends on who your audience is. If you're targeting C-suite decision makers, you may want to have a hosting program or a hospitality program at a racetrack or on a golf course, or whatever it might be. I mean, we've seen with Bleacher Report, they did that, Phil Mickelson versus Tiger. It was shot outside the U.S. and it became and was merchandised as a very, small hospitality opportunity, but the opportunity for clients and customers to get a upfront experience with Phil and Tiger that you probably wouldn't get at a normal golf event, because it was so intimate. So absolutely, we've seen some pretty interesting hospitality focused events as part of sponsored deals, and certainly right now with the environment we're in, a lot of this is virtual. There's a lot of hospitality being done through the internet versus in person. So it's yes, it's very much a strong component of a sponsorship deal, or I should say, you would certainly want for it to be, so that you can maximize the potential of that sponsorship deal.
How do brands measure the impact and the value they're getting from these sponsorships?
There's a lot of levers that go into that. I mean, we talk about brand recognition. There's a lot of surveys that we do at events where we'll try to see what brands you recall, and if you knew a brand was sponsoring something before you went into it, that kind of thing. So what's the lift from pre and post event? That certainly has strong component of it, but also is social listening, is understanding what sort of brands are being talked about within the confines of an event, or we can do targeted advertising to, and you might see it if you're on Twitter, where Twitter will just hit you with an ad that says, "We're curious if you've seen anything from this brand lately," and there's a little bit of that. So it's a lot of survey, a lot of listening and understanding what people are talking about and sharing, and making sure we're capturing that in social, and helping brands understand, if you're one of 5 sponsors, let's say, at an event, maybe last year you were 10% of the conversation in social, and this year you're 20. So and then we can just decide if hopefully that's positive, and in that case that's been an increase for the better. But we'll drill down into what was the sentiment, how are you being talked about, because it can't just be do you have a larger share of conversation and share of voice this time around. So there's a lot of levers that go into it.
Hmm. Can you give us, nothing confidential, but just something, numbers that people in the industry would kind of have as ballparks? Like, order of magnitude, what are some of the different fee levels for different types of levels of sponsorship? Like, if you are sponsoring like just one game or one season, or getting your brand as like the logo on a shirt, or can you give us a sense of just what the different options are?
Not really. What I can say is, I think you would be surprised how creative and nimble either teams are or leagues are, if you're interested in doing something even if it was one-off. I mean, we've of course seen it's, high dollar for a brand to sponsor a section or an entrance at a stadium, but if we're talking something that might be social content, you could sponsor a content series. You could advertise on something that's already been developed, or you create it with a team. But certainly, if you're approaching a team, the price is a little bit less or considerably less than if you're approaching the league and you're affecting all of the teams. So it just matters, what your goals are, and if you're more of a local or regional, and then it makes sense to do a few teams, or if it's a national play and you want to get in with the league. So I think people have expectations of what some of these deals are, and a lot of them are reported, so they're quite easy to find. But like I said, I think people feel like they might be priced out of opportunities with certain sports and certain teams, and I think you'd find a lot of people are very open to be creative.
Okay. Uh, let's talk about kind of what you've seen as the impact of the coronavirus. Obviously, just about all sports now, if not all sports, are kind of shut down at least for the near term. What kind of conversations are brands having with the player, the teams, and the leagues that they sponsor?
Yeah, it's certainly interesting, and now we're looking at, you know, games coming back probably without fans, or a considerable less number of fans because they have to be spaced out. But we saw in the last 2 months, once everything started happening, there was a big push to e-gaming. A lot of the motorsports clients we work with were focused on the iRacing platform they have, where drivers are behind the wheel controlling the same car that they would drive in person on a Sunday. But the interesting and what I think is pretty cool part of that is it wasn't necessarily every driver. It might have been somebody from their crew. We saw Dale Earnhardt get involved, and obviously, here's a driver who's retired from the sport, but can get involved on the e-gaming side of things. So a lot of stuff is going virtual, is going to gaming. We're still trying to make sure that we're keeping fans involved. I know it's difficult, especially with baseball that was about to start. There's little comparison to being at the ballpark on a great day, but we're certainly trying to bring some of those emotions to you through digital, through social, and make sure that people are feeling connected. We've been fortunate to stay working with athletes who are doing the same thing as you and I are doing. If anything, right now, they're more human than they ever were. So, having them record with their own phones what they're up to, and producing content for sponsors that, are still looking to do something, but they can't go to the actual race or the actual baseball game because it's not happening. But how do we ensure that we're still doing something for them and they're activating their sponsorship in a smart way?
What sorts of things have athletes been doing for their sponsors?
So we've been able to produce some videos where a number of players from either teams that brands have deals with are either shouting out fans directly, and we're doing a bunch of a number of videos that we can send to people, hopefully to sort of brighten up their day. Very Cameo style, if you're familiar with that platform, where every or a number of athletes or celebrities are a little bit more connected to you, in that they can produce a video for you and they can read a script, that kind of thing. So we're taking cues with that, and trying to think of interesting ways that athletes can be human and say, I know these are tough times, but we're going to get through it. I know you can't wait to see me out on the field, and I can't wait to be out there. Just hoping that we can brighten somebody's day.
Mm-hmm. How are you seeing brands kind of reevaluate or rethink their whole sponsorship strategies around events?
Yes, I think a lot of it is working in hand in hand with the leagues or the events that they would have been there personally and on premise. So what are some things that these games or leagues are offering? Are they open to hearing from us on some ideas that we might have? We've seen a lot of virtual conferences, so things can keep going on. Obviously, in the tech space, you have like Facebook that's come out and said we're not doing anything in person, maybe even potentially through next year. So all of it is going virtual. So how do you make sure that that's interesting and compelling and people still want to be a part of it? In some ways, we're finding the virtual might be, it's certainly no substitute for the in-person, but if I take a sport like F1, where it would certainly be very expensive to travel to some of these areas, if you're able to do that virtually, you could have more of your family join. You could get an inside look into the paddock or the garage before the race. So there may be, in some ways, better opportunities to provide sponsors access to things virtually than they may have been able to do in person.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. That ability to get closer. I've heard that from in other industries as well, of some innovations that COVID is kind of forcing to happen. Can you say a little bit more about that? About some of the opportunities that going virtual might open up?
I just think it's access. So for something like Formula One, or some of these events, a lot of brands have restrictions on, we won't invite spouses, we won't invite children. But now that you can go virtually, you can have your spouse join. You can have kids crowd around the laptop and see what's going on. So I just think it gives you access, and that might not have been realistic in person. And some of these events have guest speakers or musicians, or some type of music is being played. So if you're able to, as a sponsor, give access to clients or customers, and then by and large their families, that maybe couldn't have happened in person due to the restrictions of the event or due to travel costs, it's potentially a better way. I don't think in many ways it's a direct substitute, but given where we are, it's pretty interesting, and maybe a nice carrot for somebody to say, we have this speaker, and as part of our sponsorship deal, we're allowing our customers to, be able to see them talk, or have a private event, or a candid conversation that's closed to, 20, 50, 100 people. And it feels a little bit special. And so in some ways we are seeing that, and maybe it's our optimism coming out of the last 2 months, but in some ways we are seeing a better experience done virtually because of the access you're getting.
Yeah, that's really cool. Could you tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into the whole world of these kind of high level sports sponsorships and other kind of entertainment sponsorships?
Yeah, I've always worked in advertising agencies. It's really all I've known. I've been in the industry for 15 years, and bounced around through the agency holding companies, not on purpose. It's just kind of what happened. But worked at healthcare agencies. I've worked on consumer packaged goods. I've done a lot of automotive, a lot of brands with engines in them. So I feel at this point, although it wasn't necessarily the goal, I have a pretty wide depth of experience across certain categories. And, fortunate to be able to work in sports. It's been a goal for a while, and I'm glad I've been able to do that for the last 4+ years.
Fantastic. Well, Keith, for folks that wanted to connect with you or find out more about what you're doing, do you want to share any Twitter handle or websites for listeners that they could follow up?
Sure. My Twitter is probably the easiest, given it's just Keith S. And my last name is a little bit difficult, but if you can find me on Twitter, it's Keith S. And then my website's there, and my DMs are always open. I'm happy to talk with you there and connect with you on other platforms if you're interested.
Fantastic. Well, Keith, thanks so much for giving us perspective on this world of sports sponsorship and for coming on the show.
Will, appreciate you having me. Enjoy your day, and look forward to talking with you soon.